On August 25, 2023, Hairpin at Birch Bay water slides was operating normally. Around 12:52 p.m., a rider descended the slide. After exiting the double down area, they slid up onto the splash guard on a sharp turn. As they did this, the splash guard, weakened by thousands of other riders sliding over it, broke, sending the rider's right foot through the segment of missing and damaged fiberglass. The rider's foot and leg contacted the broken fiberglass and rusted steel fasteners, causing serious lacerations. The injured rider continued down the slide into the runout pool, where they were assisted by lifeguards who were alerted by the rider's yelling. The rider would be transported to a hospital where they would make a recovery. The park would close for the remainder of 2023, and the investigation would begin. The investigation would be headed by the Washington State Whatcom County Department of Health and Community Services. They would start with a site visit to examine the slides themselves. On this site visit, they would discover a large hole in the splash guard for the hairpin slide. The injured rider's foot had impacted this section of the slide splash guard and broken through the fiberglass, causing the injuries to their foot and leg. To learn more, the investigators asked about the design of the slides. The slides were made by an unknown and now defunct manufacturer for the park's opening in 1985. The slides had been resurfaced and even replaced in several sections by industry-recognized slide refurbishment company Safe Slide. The slides consisted of two main portions: the slide deck and the splash guard. The slide deck is where the riders' bodies were designed to lay. It was made of reinforced fiberglass. The splash guards were intended to keep riders' extremities and water in the slide, not to support the weight of riders under ride forces. They were made from non-reinforced fiberglass. According to the park's general manager, the slides at the park were undergoing annual maintenance conducted by third-party contractors rather than by the park itself. This included a local firm, Kensington Engineering, who would complete a structural analysis of the slides, and Safe Slide, who was performing annual refurbishments of the slides themselves. Within the time frame of the investigation, the general manager of Birch Bay Slides was only able to provide documentation from Safe Slide for the 2022 and 2023 refurbishment of the slides. Safe Slide, as a company, specializes in restoring and repairing water slides. This sometimes includes replacing slide segments altogether. Safe Slide also inspects slide deck integrity as well as doing fiberglass work to ensure a smooth ride. The park's general manager stated to investigators that the slides were walked and inspected at least once a week, with the park's maintenance team inspecting between 1 and 2 slides at the park each day before the park opens. With this being a very small water park with only 10 slides, every slide can be inspected between 1 and 2 times a week using this method. The park did not document these inspections or any repairs that took place as a result of these inspections, so it's not clear if hairpin had been repaired in the recent past in the failed area, or if any other damage was noticed. The investigators made a second visit to the park and inspected the damaged slide further. They noted that the failed splash guard segment was on the wind-facing side of the slide. They also noticed that the splash guards on the slide were held on with metal fasteners drilled into the exterior flange of the reinforced segment of the slide. They noticed that many of the fasteners that remained, especially on the wind-facing side of the slide, had considerable amounts of rust and corrosion. They also noticed several of the fasteners were loose, with a few missing altogether. Additionally, some splash guards near the broken section were loose. The investigators also noted several cracks in the fiberglass that would have taken some time to develop, meaning they were likely missed in a daily inspection or their maintenance was deferred. Again, the park maintenance log for inspections were unable to be recovered by the investigators, meaning there's no way of knowing if these problems were noticed or not. The investigators also discovered a previously repaired segment of splash guard immediately downstream from the failed guard. It was clear that the guard had been repaired at some point, as the section where it was attached had been patched to provide material for attachment of the bolts holding the guard in place. It's unclear when this repair was performed or what the nature of the splash guard's failure in this area was. Unfortunately, the county inspectors are not engineers, so that was the limit of their investigation. However, I would like to bring up another detail that I believe provides more insight into why the slide failed. The splash guards being made of non-reinforced fiberglass indicates they were not intended to experience strong forces, such as the forces experienced when keeping a rider in the slide, with the reinforced slide deck intended to take these forces instead. But watching guest point of view videos of this slide, it's clear that it was common for riders to slide up onto the splash guard in this segment, sometimes getting so high as to have their entire bodies supported by the guard. According to the park's general manager, the slides had no weight limit. Depending on the speed of riders, this segment of non-reinforced slide may have been repeatedly supporting riders, which it was not designed to do. This design flaw in the original slide went unnoticed for many years, as the slide was nearing 40 years old at the time of the accident. It's likely that this accident was waiting to happen, and in this case, the warning signs were missed, leading to this accident. July 14, 2004, on tornado located at Six Flags Hurricane Harbor, LA. On that day, the tornado slide was operating normally. A fully loaded raft was sent down the slide. The raft was jostled significantly due to improper flow from the funnel wetting nozzles located at the upper edges of the funnel. After the ride was over, one rider complained of head and neck pain and was eventually sent to the hospital. This resulted in the ride being shut down and the state of California being called in to inspect the ride. The state investigators arrived on scene and soon began testing the ride and comparing their test results to the results they had received when the ride was first certified for operation, as well as with the guidelines stipulated by ProSlide. The investigators would find that several aspects of the ride were not being operated in the same manner as when the ride was certified for operation. In addition, there were inconsistencies between the operator's manual developed by the park and used for operator training, and the owner's manual provided to the park by ProSlide. The most noticeable inconsistency had to do with the flow rates on the ride's several water flow valves. This included in the loading pool, the wake nozzles near the exit of the flume, and the wetting nozzles located at the top of the funnel. Improper flow on these nozzles had contributed to the injury on the 14th. They mandated the park bring these nozzles back in spec with manufacturer guidelines, as well as implement a way of monitoring the flow in real time to prevent the slide from operating with improper flow. These changes would go on to be implemented and the slide would re-enter operation later that year. It's not clear from the report if this injury was caused by a lack of flow or by too much flow, but too little flow would likely result in rafts having too much friction and as a result causing them to jolt or bounce. And too much flow would likely cause the stream of water at the center of the funnel to be too large of a braking force, and thus cause riders to be thrown from the raft. Accordingly, both are possible causes of this injury. On July 14, 2024, the River Rapids tube slide at Bridal Falls Water Park was operating normally, or at least as normally as this slide was capable of operating. The slide was in a deteriorated state after sitting in the ground for over 40 years. The support under many sections of the slide had washed away. In addition, the wooden core added to increase the stability of the flat sections inside the fiberglass had long since rotted away, leaving bulges in the fiberglass surface where the material started to delaminate. At around 2:45 p.m., a rider was completing the final section of the slide when they felt their foot get caught on something. They exited the runout pool with a large and deep laceration in their foot. They were quickly taken to park first aid and eventually taken for further treatment. Meanwhile, the slide continued operation, with riders making their way over and around the section of broken and sharp fiberglass pointed directly upstream near the bottom of the slide. At around 3:30 p.m., the park's general manager is informed of a problem on the slide, and after looking at the issue, decides to close access to new riders, but to continue to allow riders in the line and on the slide to traverse the flume, instructing the attendant closest to the crack to push riders around it. At around 3:40 p.m., a rider exits the slide complaining of a sprained ankle and minor cuts due to being caught in the crack. The slide continued to operate. At around 3:45 p.m., an 11-year-old rider near the end of the line is making their way down the slide. The attendant near the bottom attempts to push them away from the crack area, but due to the unpredictable forces on the slide, the rider passes directly over the sharp crack. The rider exits the runout pool with a large and life-altering laceration on their leg. The slide was finally closed, but the investigation did not begin. The park did not inform the provincial government of the incident. It was only a few days later that a concerned park visitor contacted the government and that the investigation into the accident actually began. The investigation would be handled by Technical Safety British Columbia and would focus on all aspects of the ride and the incident. This included looking for what had caused the injuries, why this problem had not been noticed, and why the ride continued to operate after a rider was injured. They first examined the slide to find the cause of the injuries. The slide itself was built into a hillside that consisted of several flat rapid sections connected by steep, sloped sliding sections. Riders would float through the turbulent rapid sections before splashing down the sliding sections. Near the bottom of the slide, on the last section where the ride switched from a sliding section to a rapid section, a large sharp crack was clearly noticeable, bulging up from the rest of the fiberglass slide. Fiberglass, as its name suggests, is much like regular glass in many ways. This includes how sharp it can be when broken. This singular crack was determined to have caused all 3 injuries on the slide. The investigation now turned to how this crack had been formed. To understand this, the team first looked at how the slide was designed. The slide was quite old and came from the early era of waterslide design. The slide was made in 1983 and consisted of several fiberglass sections with flat bottoms mounted inside a natural hill. The design of the slide obscured the underside of the flume from regular view as it was buried inside the hill itself. The manufacture of the slide was not known by anyone currently employed at the park, and there were no records from its construction. With no documentation from the slide's manufacturer, the investigators would fill in gaps regarding how the ride should have been built and maintained with information from modern waterslide manufacturers. The slide featured a large flat middle section. To support such a large flat area, the slide's original designers had laid the fiberglass over top a wooden core on both sides. This was common practice at the time on many water slides with such large flat areas. The investigators cut open the cracked area and were able to discover that the wooden core on the slide was completely gone. It had rotted away over several decades of water slowly leaking into it from the slide. This degradation was compounded by the slide featuring large amounts of water in this area during normal operation, rather than just the small stream like what would be found on most modern water slides. This had caused the fiberglass surface where the crack had occurred to bubble up prior to the crack becoming a hazard. In fact, several other areas on the slide featured large bubbling areas of fiberglass. When these were cut open, it was found that the wood core had completely rotted away in these areas too. In addition to this, the investigators looked under the slide segments. The slide featured no support structure and relied entirely on support from the ground it was built into. Under the section of the flume that had failed, investigators found a large void where dirt and gravel underneath the slide had been washed away over time, leaving a significant gap between the already weakened fiberglass and the supporting ground. In this void, the investigators found a large amount of spray foam that had been placed there in an attempt to stabilize the slide at some point in the past. However, it was noticed that the spray foam was only supporting part of the flume. The area where the crack had occurred was not being supported at all. With the design of the slide understood, the investigators turned to the maintenance and operation of the slide. The water park operated seasonally and would use the off-season to perform major slide overhauls and repairs with the use of an outside contractor who had experience working for a major waterslide manufacturer in the past. The contractor would inspect all the slides at the park over each off-season and make repair recommendations to the park's general manager. If the general manager approved of the cost of the repair, the contractor would complete the work. The contractor would do all different kinds of work, from structural repairs to gel coat replacement and more. The park's general manager and the contractor stated that repairs that were needed for the safe operation of any slide were always completed at the park, though the contractor did state that some minor non-safety critical repairs had been skipped in the past. The records of maintenance work performed by the contractor showed that the River Rapids slide had last received significant work about 3 years prior to the accident. For in-season repairs and inspections, the park's general manager and immediate staff were responsible. The park also employed a team of seasonal leads that would be in charge of walking each slide prior to park opening and making note of any issues they discovered. These staff were trained in the pre-season each year, and the park's employment record showed that turnover was rather low. This meant that most leads had multiple years of experience on the slides of the park and should be qualified to perform the inspections. The inspectors shadowed a lead as they performed an inspection of the slides at the park, and found that the lead was very thorough and found all of the same problems that the inspectors would have. The leads interviewed stated that minor cracks in the slides were somewhat common, and as long as they could run their finger over them without feeling any sharp edges or them getting caught, it was not something to be overly concerned about. This guidance is consistent with industry best practices, as often on slides there are minor defects in the fiberglass or the gel coat that may look like a concern, but are actually very minor problems. It's considered best practice to not address many of these gel coat issues until they become more significant due to how frequently they occur on all slides. The lead inspection from the morning of the accident did not show anything out of the ordinary on the River Rapids slide, only a minor crack in a pool upstream of the accident location. What was noticed by both the leads and the general manager many times before the accident, though, was the presence of bowed-out sections of fiberglass along the slide path on the River Rapids slide. These sections would often flex when stood on, and they were considered by the staff at the park to be an intentional part of the slide's design, as no one at the park was aware of how the slide was built or intended to be operated. They had no context as to what these bulges or bubbles were, so they believed them to be designed to control the speed and motion of tubes. The bubbles and bulges were actually telltale signs that the slide's core had rotted away and that the fiberglass underneath was beginning to delaminate, ultimately leading to this accident.